And we're back with our elections and surveys director, Anthony Salvanto, and we're also joined by Cook Political Report's Amy Walter, as well as our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. It's good to be with all of you. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. More numbers. Give us the top line number of the Republican field right now.
So Donald Trump is still on top, comfortably, and in two important ways. One, very simply, in vote choice. He's at 61% when people say who they would support right now. But in another very important way, in consideration. That's when people can pick multiple candidates, one more if they like, because this is a point in the campaign where they're evaluating things more generally, and he's up in that consideration too. So
there's not a special second candidate that's hiding in the wings according to consideration. But don't answer that, because I want to ask you, in terms of what the former president is talking about, is it what people want to hear?
No. In a short answer. They don't want to hear him talk about 2020. They don't want to hear him talk about himself or the past. They want to hear him talk about plans for the country. And yet, he's still leading.
Yep. Amy, what do you make of that in this current context where there's the first indictment of a former federal indictment?
I think there are two things. One is, if the leadership of the party and his own rivals are echoing what Trump is saying about this indictment. This is politically motivated. This is rigged. This is a witch hunt. Why should we believe that voters are going to feel any differently? So they're kind of all following each other in this. And the other one about why are they not talking about the number one issue? If you talk to the folks in and around, say, the DeSantis campaign, they believe the only way to go and chip away at Trump support is to go at him from the right on some of these cultural issues. Yeah. That's where they see him as most vulnerable. And when you talk about the economy, voters overwhelmingly, I'm sure you've seen this in your polling already, Anthony, voters in the Republican primary think that Trump did a great job on the economy. So trying to out-economy him is going to be very difficult.
And also, he may not have to talk about it much. They're like, yep, he's our guy. We've checked that box. Right. He can talk about whatever he wants because we've assumed he's going to do a great job. And
this is where the governor that you just interviewed Burgum is trying to make his case that, look, I'm actually the business guy. I've actually done this. I'm going to address those issues. Getting that traction, though, is going to be very difficult when we still are focused much more on what's going on with Trump than anybody other candidate.
I want to ask about that blocking, which we talked a little bit about with Governor Sununu. Ed, you've been out on the trail. There are some of former President Trump's rivals who are trying to make the moral case, who are trying to make, how's that going for them?
Not very well, as you can see in these numbers. I mean, 1%, right, for Asa Hutchinson. Chris Christie, probably too early to measure. What I was struck by is that the top five there in the consideration category, so it was Trump, DeSantis, Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley. Those are the names I heard from voters, the five of them. And so that sort of gives you a sense that at this point, maybe that's the ball game, right? That Trump is obviously double digits ahead of all of them. But if anybody else right now in name ID, staffing operations has a shot at Iowa and New Hampshire, it's probably those five right now. I'm struck, too, by Governor Burgum's decision this week to come out and say, I'm going to talk about the economy, energy, and national security. In some ways, energy bleeds into the other two. So maybe really he's just running for energy secretary one day. But he's made a point, and it's just been proven in the polling, that most voters want to be listening to candidates talk about inflation and the economy, which for more than a year, right, has been the number one concern.
And when you get there, by the way, that's what's on your plate.
Right.
The stuff he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I mean, first of all, it always feels good when the reporter on the ground is seeing the same things we're seeing in the polling. But look, when you list out for folks what they want in a president, in the abstract, right? And for Republicans, it's been someone who challenges woke ideas. It's also been someone who has economic plans or can make the economy better, et cetera. Whatever it is, Donald Trump is your guy. Mm-hmm. And so you can sort of wrap that up. And they say, do they want someone like Donald Trump? They want someone similar to Donald Trump? They say yes. And he's running.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned that, though. The woke, the attack on woke is an attack. We don't have a lot of candidates, and Tim Scott is the other one. But Governor Burgum is hey, actually, I'm going to show you about where I came from and these American values in a small town with 400 people and building it's the old optimistic message that in the old days, every candidate had to have one. Right. Now it's basically Burgum and Scott.
That's right. That they want, Republican voters want somebody who's going to fight for them. Because if you do believe as a Republican voter that the system itself is rigged, that we, as are these voters, we are being basically oppressed by whoever you want to put in that category. Coastal elites, the folks who run the Justice Department, all of them are against us. We need somebody who's going to fight for us. The other thing, just going back to the economy, I heard this a lot from Republicans after the election. They looked at the data that's in 2022, that election. They looked at the data that said number one issue is inflation, we're going to win. But you listen to the voters and what they said was, well, we never heard what your plan was, right? We knew that, yeah, we don't think Biden's doing a great job on inflation, but what are you going to do about it?
Ed, let me pick up on something Amy just said, which is interesting. So some people say, well, the Republicans have rallied around Donald Trump. He's under threat. But what if the way this is being framed by Republicans, which is this is all partisan, this is all a manipulation of the system, creates an appetite for Donald Trump? In other words, if it's all rigged, we want the best rigger in the game on our side.
Well, if that's the case, then I think the polling continues to show us they can nominate him, but he may be set up to lose again. Because overall, in the general election, we're seeing Americans overall believe that this was justified, that he should be prosecuted, right? And then, of course, he lost last time, and there's nothing yet that suggests that he would win a general election other than perhaps some horse race numbers this early. The one thing I think gives Democrats reason to be hopeful about those general election matchups, you asked about attributes in a president, who you want, or what characteristics you want in a president. Topping the list was truthfulness, right? Character and empathy. At the bottom of that list was someone who's articulate, energetic, and youthful, right? So if you're the Biden campaign right now, you go, oh, they want the truthful, truth-telling, that's us, right? We're not the articulate, youthful one. So that whole argument's gone away. That's why they remain hopeful that if it is Trump, they can still win this thing.
And what are they saying inside the Democratic Party about their nominee?
Well, what's interesting about Biden is, okay, he's at 41% approval. He's been in the low 40s for a while. To Ed's point, he does better in approval with folks who want a president that is calm, predictable, right, and steady. And those are all things that, if you go back to 2020, were selling points for him. Yeah. All right. But now the question is going to be, does that necessarily meet the moment? And there are concerns among Democrats about whether he should run again. And you get 4 in 10 Democrats in this survey saying that they don't think that he should. And their concern is about his second term.
Is this just a repeat, Amy, of 2020?
It sure feels that way, doesn't it?
Structurally,
it structurally
well
feels that we are going to be fighting and talking about the same types of voters, right? These voters who may not be in love with Joe Biden, but feel as the job that he's doing, but feel as if they have little choice but to vote for him because they don't think the alternative is acceptable. In 2016, or maybe it's a little bit like 2016, are we going to see that repeat where you have a significant number of people that say, I dislike both candidates, but at the end of the day, I'm going to have to go with this person. So you have a whole bunch of people who are even more dispirited about their choice than were in 2020, where people were a little bit more optimistic, at least, about who they were choosing to vote for. But this thing about Biden that has always been the case is even in 2020, the significant number of people who voted for him said, I only voted for him because he wasn't Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So there's never been this cult of personality around Joe Biden like we saw around Obama, like we obviously see around Donald Trump. So rallying support for Biden has always been about the other rather than about Biden.
Ed, you cover the White House. Obviously, Joe Biden's not talking about this, and they won't say anything about it. But one thing that struck me is he had developed some kind of relationship with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, through the debt ceiling negotiations. But now Kevin McCarthy is coming out at the sort of the furthest edge of response and saying this is being led by the president, of which there's no evidence. What does that mean for lawmaking life in Washington going forward?
I think the White House understands that Kevin McCarthy has a real problem holding his own caucus together. And there are Freedom Caucus arch-conservative members who needed to hear the Speaker say those things in the wake of the debt ceiling agreement. Remember, the House was sent home early this past week because they couldn't move some very simple things through amid the conservative opposition to the debt limit deal. By saying what he said, he's appeasing those guys in hopes that they can all come back next week and get things moving again. The president, the White House understand that McCarthy has to be out there talking, appeasing these people. But at the end of the day, they believe when it comes to a government shutdown threat potentially in September and all the other things they'll have to do, they'll find a way to do it because ultimately chaos just doesn't favor Congress as it's currently constructed.
So they're not taking it personal, just business.
Not this president.
Amy, Ed, and Anthony, thank you so much, and we'll be right back.